A new beginning in Willow Creek. My name is Lindsay Thompson, and as I sit on the worn steps of my little porch in Willow Creek, Nevada, I can't help but retrace the path that led me here. I was 34, a freshly minted single mom with a heart patched together by hope, fear, and sheer necessity. Life had always thrown a curveball or two my way, but divorce? That one left a scar. My son Lucas, just turning 8, was my whole world. Yet moving to this sleepy town felt less like an escape and more like a leap into a void I couldn't yet see the bottom of. Willow Creek isn't the sort of place you see in glossy magazines. Main Street has exactly 2 stoplights, a diner that serves pancakes until midnight, and a hardware store where everyone knows your coffee order better than your name. Our little rented house sat on the edge of town, with paint peeling around the windows and a lopsided mailbox that looked perpetually confused. But to Lucas and me, it was a castle, a fortress where we would start over, free from the echo of slammed doors and arguments that seemed to circle endlessly without resolution. The first morning, sunlight streamed through the faded curtains, and the scent of last night's rain hung in the air. I watched Lucas run outside to chase the neighbor's old hound dog, his laughter carrying over dew-damp grass. For the first time in months, I realized I was breathing easier. No more whispered fighting, no walking on eggshells. Adjusting wasn't easy. The silence here was sharp, almost loud. Without the constant buzz of city life and the noise of my old headaches, I was left alone with my own thoughts, sometimes a blessing, sometimes not. Nights could get long, and doubt had a nasty habit of visiting after midnight. Had I done the right thing? Would Lucas be happy here, away from everything he'd known? But Willow Creek began to wrap its arms around us, slowly. Ms. Kennedy from next door dropped off a pie with a note scrawled, "Welcome to the neighborhood. Knock if you need sugar or company." The owner of the bookstore remembered Lucas's favorite mystery novel and always had a new one tucked aside for him. Even the grumpy old men at the gas station started waving to us every morning. Small things, maybe insignificant to someone who'd never had to start over, but to me, they were lifelines when loneliness threatened to drag me under. At night, while Lucas slept, I made lists of the things I wanted to build in this new life. Simple ones. Try the blueberry pancakes at the diner. Plant daisies by the mailbox. Help Lucas make at least one good friend before school starts. Some nights, I'd cross my own name off the list, just for sticking it through one more day. Mostly, I found myself wrestling with guilt. The town was peaceful, and Lucas was settling in, but a part of me couldn't let go of the feeling that peace came at a cost. I missed the version of life where family meant unity, not division. Still, as I tucked Lucas in each night, listening to the soft Nevada wind, I made silent promises to him and to myself. Here, we heal. Here, we grow. Here, we start again, no matter what comes next. The first shocking blow from my ex-husband's family. If you'd asked me back then, I would have told you the hardest battles in my life were behind me. Relocating, finding our rhythm, learning to trust that quiet could mean safety.
Hello there.
A challenge, yes,
That's a nice drawing you have.
but nothing compared to what came next. The first real shock from my ex-husband's family hit me like a lightning bolt in a cloudless sky. It happened just a few weeks after Lucas and I began to feel genuinely settled in our new home. One afternoon, a thick envelope, official-looking and intimidating, arrived in my mailbox. The return address, the law office representing the Parker family, my ex's parents. My heart hammered. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope in my hands, while Lucas worked on a puzzle at my feet, blissfully unaware. I tore it open, hands trembling. Legal jargon stared up at me, but the words, petition for custody, stood out, bold and terrifying. The Parkers were claiming I was unfit to raise my own son, asserting that the instability of moving to this new town and my emotional volatility made me a danger to Lucas's development. I couldn't believe it. The accusations were stranger than fiction. That I was neglectful, that I isolated Lucas from the support he needed, that I made impulsive decisions and couldn't provide a suitable home environment. Sitting alone at that table, the walls seemed to press in on me. Rage fought with heartbreak. How could they twist my determination to give Lucas a better life into something malicious? How could they want to take away the one thing that made every difficult day worth it? Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall where Lucas might see. The Parkers, with their old money and influential friends, had always been able to pull strings. During the divorce, I'd been careful, never lashing out publicly, never giving them ammunition. But now, it felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. The idea of being dragged into court, forced to defend my love for my son, sent shards of panic through me. Did I have enough money for a lawyer? Would the judge believe me or them? Night after night, I lay in bed with questions bouncing around my mind. Every time I listened to Lucas breathe in the next room, the fear grew sharper. But anger slowly substituted despair. Yes, their attack was sudden and cruel, but it also ignited something fierce inside me. If I didn't fight back, Lucas and I might lose everything we'd struggled to build. I started saving every receipt, every neighborly note, any record that proved how safe and loved Lucas was in Willow Creek. I wrote down memories, trips to the playground, our routines at the library, home-cooked meals. I talked to friends, teachers, anyone who'd bear witness for us. The Parkers might have their money and their connections, but I had a mother's conviction, stubborn, unbreakable, and unapologetic. Each day, I steeled myself for the unknown. I made sure Lucas saw only determination in my eyes, even as dread chewed at my insides. The fight over custody wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war over the truth of who I was and the future I envisioned for my son. I didn't know then how long the road would be or how dark the nights might get, but I made one silent vow as autumn set in over Willow Creek. I would not let them erase our new beginning, no matter what it cost me. Cornered, and the spark of defiance. It's a lie to say there was a single moment when I realized, deep in my bones, that if I didn't fight back with everything I had, I would lose Lucas forever. The truth is, the sensation crept in gradually, like a slow rising tide that only becomes dangerous once it's already flooded the shoreline. But there was one night, the eve of our first court hearing, when hopelessness threatened to consume me. And something vital inside me finally broke through the fog of fear. That night, the house felt impossibly quiet. Lucas slept, his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm, oblivious to the battle lines forming just outside his bedroom door. I sat hunched at the tiny kitchen table, a pile of legal documents and half-drunk mugs of cold coffee stacked around me like a fortress. The Parkers' accusations, printed in black type on expensive paper, made my hands tremble with rage and humiliation. But what froze me wasn't what they'd written. It was what I saw in myself, the creeping doubt that maybe I really was failing, that maybe I'd already lost. I put my head in my hands and cried harder than I had in years. There was no one to witness the messy, painful unraveling. I was fighting not just the Parkers or the legal system, but my own sense of worth. Every voice from my past telling me I was never enough. Each tear was a release, each sob a torch to old memories. Nights spent sitting through arguments that never ended, years spent tiptoeing around another person's temper. It was as if the shadows of my entire marriage had returned to haunt me when I could least afford their visit. In those moments of despair, images ricocheted through my mind. Lucas, running through the grass, his laughter lighting up spaces I thought were lost to darkness forever. His small hand gripping mine on his first day of school. The way he looked at me when I told him everything would be all right, and how much I'd believed it, for both our sakes. Suddenly, something inside me hardened. The fear was real, the exhaustion was real, but damn it, so was my love for my boy. I realized, with perfect clarity, that the only thing worse than fighting and losing would be giving up. I couldn't let Lucas see his mother broken by fear. Couldn't let those who'd never lifted a finger for him dictate the definition of family. That's when the spark of resistance caught fire. I started by making a promise to myself, whispering into the silent house, I will do whatever it takes, no matter how daunting the legal maze, or how coldly the Parkers wielded their power. I would refuse to become what they accused me of being. Every ounce of pain they inflicted would become fuel for the battle ahead. The next day, I began gathering evidence in earnest. I reached out to neighbors and teachers, local business owners. The small community I'd once been uncertain about proved surprisingly eager to help. Ms. Kennedy wrote a letter describing the kindness and care she saw between Lucas and me. Mr. Allen from the bookstore talked about the literary adventures Lucas and I shared. Even the diner waitress chimed in, mentioning our weekend breakfast tradition in the way Lucas would slide into the booth next to me, always grinning. I realized the threads of our life, woven quietly over weeks and months, formed a pattern of safety and love, witnessed by more than just me. Talking to people about our situation was terrifying at first. I worried constantly that they would judge me, side with the Parkers, or simply not care. But Willow Creek surprised me. A single mom fighting alone was met with something remarkable: compassion, empathy, and a willingness to stand up for what was right. Each letter, each small gesture of solidarity became an anchor in an uncertain sea. Bit by bit, I chipped away at the shame that had weathered me for years. I started to see myself differently, not just as a survivor, but as a woman, transforming pain into purpose. The more I examined the Parkers' accusations, the more I recognized them for what they were: a desperate attempt to rewrite history and claim a boy who'd never been their priority. I saw now that their power was hollow, built on appearances rather than love. The following weeks were a blur of action. I scoured every memory for proof: the family photos, the report cards, the artwork Lucas proudly displayed on our fridge, the thank you notes from teachers and neighbors. I met with my lawyer again and again. We rehearsed responses to every possible question the Parkers team might throw at me, determined to make the truth louder than their carefully rehearsed half-truths. But the decision to fight wasn't only about evidence. I realized I had to heal parts of myself that had long festered. I joined a support group for single mothers in town, and for the first time, shared my fears aloud. There, sitting among other women juggling uncertainty and hope, I found not judgment, but kinship. Their stories became a kind of map, a guide through the emotional labyrinth of custody battles and starting over. I found comfort in shared laughter and strength in their reminders that I was not alone. Late at night, fear still waited for me, like an old companion. But now, alongside the dread, there was something more potent, a stubborn, radiant hope. I'd see it in Lucas's sleepy eyes in the morning, in his trust as he grasped my hand, and faced each new day. My sense of purpose grew clearer with every challenge we faced. This fight was for our right to define our future, free from the ghosts of a marriage I'd finally left behind. Sometimes I wrote letters addressed to no one in particular, long, rambling confessions that I'd tear up or stuff in the bottom of a drawer. The point was not that anyone would read them, but that I could let the grief and anger pass through me instead of taking root. I began journaling the small victories as well as the setbacks, turning our survival into a testament of resilience. By the time the court hearings began in earnest, I was no longer the fragile woman who'd arrived in Willow Creek desperate for shelter. I was standing taller, my voice steadier, and my faith in our story unshakable. Though the shadow of the Parkers' influence still loomed, their power over my mind had waned. I was ready, not just to defend myself and Lucas, but to shine a light on the truth, whatever it would cost. So when I walked into the courtroom, I wore not just my best clothes, but my hard-won conviction. I looked at Lucas, whose small hand found mine, and I knew, whatever the outcome, I had refused to let fear write our ending. Defiance, born of heartbreak and hope, had become my battle cry. Our story was no longer a tragedy. It was a rebellion, fierce and unapologetic, against every voice that ever said we weren't enough. Shadows behind the Parker door. If you've ever wondered whether money and status can hide family secrets, the Parkers will answer your question. Their mansion had always seemed a world away from the life I'd grown to know. High, brick walls lined with roses, a security gate that made every visitor feel like an intruder. But sometimes, the prettiest houses cast the longest shadows. And as I was forced to fight for my place as Lucas's mother, I also started to lift the veil on who the Parkers really were. I began to investigate, not because I wanted to dig up dirt for the sake of malice, but because I needed every ounce of truth to protect Lucas and myself. Family secrets don't stay buried forever. In the beginning, I hesitated. This was Lucas's heritage too, and the last thing I wanted was to hurt him. But the Parkers weren't playing by any rules I recognized, and every day in court became a new exercise in humiliation and gaslighting. So, I started talking to people who had known the Parkers for decades, their former staff, old family friends, even rivals in business who had once been guests at their dinner table, but now only spoke of them in hushed tones. The story that emerged was patchwork, elusive, but deeply unsettling. I learned that the Parkers' fortune was not as squeaky clean as they let on. There were whispers of underhanded real estate deals, conveniently lost records, and nonprofit donations that always seemed to benefit the family more than the causes themselves. There were rumors, painful ones, about shouting matches behind closed doors, about loyalty bought rather than earned, about family feuds smoothed over with money and veiled threats. The more I learned, the more I realized why the Parkers fought so ruthlessly. They had curated their reputation for decades, and my presence, my fight for custody, threatened to expose the fractures behind their polished exterior. For the first time, I understood that their attack on me was not only about Lucas. It was about holding together the myth of the perfect Parker family. People slowly started trusting me with stories. There were hushed confessions from a former housekeeper who'd been abruptly dismissed after asking too many questions about bruises on Mrs. Parker's arm. A landscaper recalled a screaming match that ended with a shattered window and a car speeding off into the night. Even Lucas, when he was very small, had once asked why his grandfather called him an investment. At the time, I'd brushed it off as a strange joke. Now, it made me sick. It wasn't only financial shadows either. Some nights, Running my hands over the court documents stacked in my room, I'd think of all the times my ex-husband, Andrew, had flinched at the sound of his father's voice, or dissolved into angry silence after a visit home. Maybe the Parkers' need to control Lucas was rooted in generations of emotional coldness. Love measured in expectations, in achievements, rather than joy. I kept what I learned under strict confidence, but I documented everything. Emails, texts, vague details corroborated by different people. I built a file. There was no pleasure in it. If anything, it left me with more fear, knowing just how deep the family's influence and bitterness could run. Sometimes I woke in the night, terrified that challenging the Parkers would backfire, that I would not only lose Lucas, but bring harm to anyone who spoke up. But truth, once uncovered, begs for air. The day I showed my lawyer the collection, I felt the risk in my bones. We decided together that the best way to fight was not with threats or public accusations, but with careful, strategic use if it ever became necessary. For the first time, I felt the balance of power begin to shift ever so slightly. It was a heavy burden to arm myself with secrets. I hated the feeling of plotting, of becoming someone who had to outthink and outmaneuver in order to parent my child in peace. But I told myself, and Lucas in my heart, that sometimes doing the right thing required being brave enough to see the ugliness beneath the surface and to refuse to be intimidated by it. As the custody fight dragged on and the court hearings grew more intense, I stopped seeing the Parkers as untouchable. Their threats became desperate. The facade they'd polished for years began to show cracks, and in those cracks, I found not only the evidence I needed to protect Lucas, but also a kind of grim hope, the belief that truth, once spoken, could break even the deepest shadow. It's a lesson I carry forward, one that continues to shape the way I fight, love, and believe in starting over, no matter what darkness I might have to walk through. Turning the media into a weapon. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd one day find myself talking to reporters, navigating interviews, and watching my life play out across columns and news segments, I would have laughed. Me, the woman who once hid from whispers in grocery store aisles and dreaded phone calls from unfamiliar numbers. It was unthinkable, but in Willow Creek, and up against the vast machinery of the Parkers' influence, necessity has a way of transforming you. I discovered strength in places I'd never expected, and resolve in aspects of myself I'd always doubted. The trigger was simple. One rainy Thursday, I opened my mailbox to find a small envelope with no return address. Inside, a single note. They're spreading lies about you at the church and the old high school. People are starting to believe them. You have to fight back. For a second, I nearly tore the paper in anger, but the message burned in my chest. Ignoring these stories wasn't protecting Lucas or me. It was isolating us. By letting others control the narrative, I was letting their version of the truth stand uncontested. Up until that point, I had spent every ounce of energy proving myself in court and piecing together evidence for my lawyer. But for every fact I presented in the hushed sanctity of a courtroom, a chorus of rumors grew louder outside its walls. Some people said I was unstable. Others claimed Lucas was homesick and neglected. A few even concluded that my fight was all about money. The Parkers, with their subtle hints and well-timed conversations in PTA meetings or the coffee shop, knew exactly how to plant seeds of doubt. If I kept hiding, the harvest would be distrust. Maybe even a judge swayed by the court of public opinion. That night, after Lucas fell asleep and the house was silent, I sat with a pad of paper, and wrote out in trembling handwriting, "What are you really afraid of?" The answer was immediate: being misunderstood, being painted as a villain in my child's story, being stripped of my chance at redemption. If the Parkers wielded whispers as weapons, I needed to answer with something bolder and far more public. I started with the local weekly newspaper. It wasn't New York Times, but in a town like Willow Creek, the Willow Gazette was gospel. I dialed the main office twice before finding the courage to let the phone ring through. The voice on the other end belonged to Ms. Ruth Stovall, a no-nonsense editor with a reputation for championing the underdog. I expected skepticism. Instead, she surprised me with her kindness and clarity. She told me, "This town survives on stories, Lindsay. But it's up to you what story they hear." I met Ruth at a booth in the neon-lit diner, clutching a folder full of photos, court filings, and hand-scrawled notes from neighbors. My heart thudded so loudly, I could barely hear her over it. For nearly 2 hours, I poured out the messy sequence. The move to Willow Creek, my reasons for leaving, the sudden custody suit, and all the ways the Parkers had tried to undermine my life. I showed her the truth: the late-night fevers Lucas battled alone, the birthday parties with empty chairs, the warmth of our quiet routines. Ruth asked direct questions, but never once made me feel defensive. When she closed her little reporter's notebook, she said, "You know they're going to push back, right? This is going to embarrass them." I nodded. Embarrassing the Parkers was never my intention. Survival was. And maybe, just maybe, justice. Ruth promised she'd check every fact, that she'd give the Parkers a chance to respond. But she also promised something bigger. Your story will have a heartbeat, not just a headline. The next morning, panic and anticipation battled inside me as I waited for that first article to land. I didn't have to wait long for sparks to catch. The front page read, "Single mother battles powerful family for her son." A story of loss, hope, and the relentless determination of a parent. The article didn't just lay out the legal battle. It painted a picture of daily life: breakfasts in the sunroom, soccer games at the park, Lucas's grin beneath his mop of brown hair. Ruth captured my humility, my longing for a fresh start, and, most of all, my fierce love for my son. The impact was instant. Neighbors who had been reserved began smiling and waving to Lucas and me. Parents at Lucas's school made small talk that wasn't laced with suspicion. Even the waitress at the diner gave me an extra cherry in my milkshake with a wink. People remembered the mother, not the rumors. More importantly, the court of public opinion in Willow Creek began to tip out of the Parkers' favor. Predictably, the Parker camp was furious. Within days, their attorney fired off a sternly worded letter, threatening legal action for defamation, slander, and unauthorized release of private family information. It was more bluster than substance, but it rattled me all the same. Ms. Stovall reassured me. They're used to controlling the story. If they respond, let them. We'll verify, print the truth, and correct any error. But their shadow isn't the only thing this town sees anymore. Still, the Parkers didn't just rely on legal threats. Overnight, their side of the story began to appear in suspiciously similar letters to the editor. Old family friends wrote testimonials about their generosity and character. Anonymous comments cropped up, accusing me of being ungrateful and unstable. But I refused to flinch. I appeared on a local radio program, my voice shaking in the beginning, but growing steadier as I spoke about what Lucas meant to me and why I was fighting. I shared quiet, vulnerable moments. The panic of the first day at a new school. The relief when Lucas ran into my arms every afternoon. I answered every question, even the hard ones, with honesty, because authenticity was the only thing the Parkers could never fake. As the weeks passed, I realized that telling my story wasn't just a defensive move. It was an act of defiance and reclamation. The pain I'd endured, the isolation, even the humiliation, all of it became part of a larger shared truth. People started reaching out. Some were other single parents, grateful to know they weren't alone. Others were estranged relatives or former employees of the Parkers who'd seen the darker side of the family and wanted to offer support. Each message, each handshake in the grocery store felt like a brick in a wall of solidarity being built around me and Lucas. The battle moved beyond Willow Creek. A regional TV station sent a crew on a bright winter morning. Cables snaked through our small living room as the interviewer asked, "Why risk exposing yourself like this?" I answered honestly, because the silence almost cost me everything. Because my boy deserves to grow up in the sunlight, not the shadow of someone else's reputation. The reporter nodded with understanding and listened, not just for scandal, but for strength. The segment, when it aired, was raw and authentic. Viewers saw Lucas curled up with his favorite mystery novels, baking cookies with me, giggling as flour dusted his hair. They saw a real child, not an abstract pawn. My own nerves melted as feedback poured in. Support, encouragement, even offers of legal aid from strangers who saw themselves in our struggle. With every new headline and each show of support, the Parkers' carefully cultivated narrative began to fray. I could sense it in the mock-polite emails from their legal team. Their desperation bled through every word. But the media wasn't a magic force. It couldn't rewrite the past or erase the anxiety that kept me awake at night. Every interview was exhausting, and every public appearance meant risking new judgments. Sometimes I hated how exposed I felt, how my wounds became fodder for other people's curiosity. But each time I faltered, I reminded myself, this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about giving Lucas and families like ours the dignity of their own voice. I started a blog, chronicling our journey not only through the court system, but through the trials of hope and healing. Posts ranged from recipes we tested, to rants about insurance headaches, to reflections on forgiveness. Readers from as far as Reno and Boise wrote back, sharing advice, or saying how my honesty emboldened them to share their own truths. And there were costs, of course. Friends who once stood by the Parkers, some by choice, some by circumstance, pulled away. I got the occasional nasty call or stinging online comment. The pressure of performing for an audience, even one that was largely sympathetic, pressed down on me. There were days I questioned if I'd gone too far, put Lucas at too much risk, or made myself into something I never intended. Yet the alternative was unthinkable. Silence, secrecy, shame. They were the Parkers' weapons. Truth, transparency, and a willingness to embrace imperfection were mine. I realized along the way that the more I spoke, the less I had to hide. My honesty became a shield that made me less vulnerable to their attacks. No matter how loudly they protested or how many intimidating letters arrived in my mailbox, I could always point to the record and say, "Here I am. This is our reality." By the time our case captured the attention of a statewide columnist, it was clear the media campaign was no longer just about me. I represented a kind of resistance. The small-town mom who stood her ground against power, money, and deeply entrenched privilege. The article, poignant and boldly written, posed a simple question. Who defines home? The ones with the most resources, or the ones who love the hardest? That narrative proved hard to shake. even for the Parkers. The judge in our case, originally distant and formal, began requesting more community testimonials and less from slick city lawyers. Friends and acquaintances volunteered to write letters and testify, inspired by what they'd read or seen on TV. Suddenly, the case was being tried not only in a dusty courtroom, but in the hearts and minds of an entire region. Of course, none of it happened overnight. Every step forward felt precarious. On some days, it took all my courage to walk down Main Street holding my head high. On others, I wanted to move again, disappear, become anonymous. But political consultant friends who'd read my blog told me, visibility is your power and your armor. For the first time, I believed them. My shame was replaced by validation, a reminder that my voice did matter. One of the most surprising ripple effects was how the attention changed Lucas. At first, he hated the cameras and the whispers. My greatest worry was that my decision to go public would push him further into his shell. But over the months, he began to understand. Not just the fight, but the reason for it. He asked thoughtful questions, offered suggestions for the blog, even wrote his own small essay titled Why My Mom is My Hero, which Ruth published in a special Sunday issue. It reduced me to tears and reminded me that courage, even clumsy, imperfect, and televised, could be inherited as surely as eye color or temperament. Looking back, I realized the decision to turn to the media was born not just from anger or desperation, but from a hunger for connection. When the Parkers built walls, I built bridges. Sometimes those bridges were flimsy or hastily constructed. An awkward radio segment, a rambling blog post, a teary TV interview. But each one pushed back against the loneliness that threatened to swallow me whole. Each new voice, joined to ours, made it harder for anyone to ignore what we were really fighting for. The right to define home and family for ourselves, without interference, intimidation, or shame. It was exhausting, vulnerable, at times humiliating work. But as I walked each morning past the Gazette's sandwich board of headlines, pausing to see my story tucked next to notices for bake sales or lost pets, I felt a growing pride. My voice, shaky as it still sometimes was, echoed further than I could have dreamed. And every day that another mother or father or scared child read our story, the Parkers' weapons lost a little of their power because their silence, at last, was interrupted by truth. A battle for justice in the courtroom. The day I stepped inside the courthouse for our first full custody hearing, my hands felt clammy, and my heart was so loud, I was sure everyone could hear it. Courtroom dramas on TV always portray those spaces as grand and intimidating, but nothing truly prepares you for the cold reality of a room where the future of your family lies on a judge's decision. I tried to steady myself, whispering encouragement as if repeating a favorite hymn for courage. Lucas clung tighter to my hand. Sensing my nerves, I knelt and looked him in the eye, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. No matter what happens today, I love you, and I'll never stop fighting for you, I told him. His nod, brave yet uncertain, made me want to both cry and laugh for how much I loved that kid. I sent him off with my friend Maggie, who waited outside with snacks and superhero coloring books and squared my shoulders. It was time to face the Parkers on their home turf. The Parkers arrived in force, a cluster of pressed suits and pearl necklaces, all steel-backed smiles. Their attorney, a man with a politician's handshake and a shark's gaze, greeted my lawyer as if it were a cocktail party and not a hearing about a child's life. I felt like David facing a battalion of Goliaths, and for a split second, The urge to run nearly undid me. But then I remembered every night I'd lain awake, clutching Lucas's hand, or piecing together evidence, and I straightened my spine. This was not a fight I chose, but one I would finish. Inside, the sanitized air smelled faintly of paper and anxiety. There were no grand speeches or dramatic objections, like on TV. In reality, justice is a slow crawl. Stacks of documents, careful testimony, and relentless questions designed to trip you up. The judge, an older woman with a razor-sharp mind and surprisingly kind eyes, called the case to order. And for a moment, the world shrank to her gavel and our table. The Parkers' side began. Their attorney presented them as the embodiment of stability and devotion, showing meticulously prepared photo albums and glowing testimonies from old family friends, many with charitable donations or business ties to the Parkers. They painted me as unstable, a flighty single mother who endangered Lucas by moving him to an unknown town. Every flaw of my past, my anxiety, my late-night calls to Maggie for help, moments of indecision, turned into bullets meant to shred my credibility. There were moments when their stories made me doubt my own memories. Did I really do enough? Had I failed my son without even realizing? But then, my own witnesses spoke. Ms. Kennedy from next door, Mr. Allen the bookseller, Lucas's second-grade teacher, all took the stand and spoke honestly, gently, about our life in Willow Creek. They described laughter and bedtime stories, soccer games, and the way Lucas would light up around me. Their words poked tiny holes in the Parkers' picture-perfect canvas, letting in slivers of truth. Testifying in court was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I sat at the witness stand, palms sweaty, knees knocking under the desk, and answered question after question. The Parkers' lawyer tried to catch me off guard. Did you ever lose your temper with Lucas? Are you taking your anxiety medication regularly? Isn't it true you have no family nearby? His tone implied accusation with every syllable. Each word weighed heavy. But I remembered my lawyer's advice. Answer directly. Don't justify. And always come back to Lucas's well-being. I spoke about the reasons I left my marriage, not out of recklessness, but to protect my son from an environment of tension and control. I explained the move to Willow Creek as an act of hope, not irresponsibility. I told them about Lucas's adjustment, about how he'd flourished with new friends in school projects, about the Saturday mornings we spent cooking pancakes and reading books together. I knew I wasn't perfect, but if there's one thing I could prove, it was who I was when the doors were closed and no one was watching. A mother who chose love every single day, even when it was hard. When my lawyer questioned me, the tone shifted. She asked about our daily routine, about how Lucas would come home, beaming with a new library book in hand, about the birthday cupcakes I baked for his class, even the time we laughed so hard while making slime that we ended up cleaning glue from the ceiling for days. I saw the judge smile at that story. The moments that made up our life, the mundane and the magical, became evidence more powerful than any official document. The Parkers tried to introduce doubt through character witnesses, people who barely knew me, but had formed opinions from gossip and hearsay. Their testimonies dripped with condescension. Something inside me shifted. I no longer felt small under their gaze. Instead, I realized that their power came from a fear of truth. The truth that love isn't measured by wealth, prestige, or the size of your last holiday card. Several days stretched into weeks, each one a marathon of stress. I developed a ritual before each hearing. I'd pour myself a cup of strong black coffee, slip a small photo of Lucas into my purse, and spend 5 minutes breathing, reminding myself of every victory, no matter how small. Maggie would squeeze my shoulder and say, "You belong here. They're just loud. You're real." In the halls outside the courtroom, strangers sometimes approached me, whispering encouragement or simply pressing a hand to mine. The support of Willow Creek, and even beyond, as the story gained attention, became my armor. The people rooting for me hadn't gathered because I was flawless, but because I was fighting, openly, imperfectly, for something that mattered. I saw it reflected in the crowd's eyes, in the way Lucas waved to me through the glass doors before going to school, in the stacks of cards and letters waiting on my porch each time I returned home. My lawyer was a force of nature. She moved through the courtroom with a quiet, steady confidence, countering every accusation with calmly presented facts, and always centering Lucas, never losing sight of who this was for. At one point, she submitted a scrapbook Lucas had made at school. It was messy, with crooked stickers and scrawled handwriting, but it was filled with drawings of us baking, hiking, and reading side by side. The Parkers team objected, claiming it was sentimental and irrelevant, but the judge allowed it as evidence, proof of a child's world and where he felt safe. The Parkers looked startled for the first time. Their meticulously prepared case couldn't outshine the authenticity of a child's art. I saw the mask begin to slip. Behind their pristine facades, there was something brittle, an inability to understand that sometimes what's messy, raw, and real is truer than anything manufactured. As the proceedings neared conclusion, my anxiety began to churn into resolve. I learned to trust my memory. I could track down every school note, every medical appointment, every neighbor's letter attesting to my fitness as a parent. The Parkers' attempts to discredit me grew desperate, slipping from subtle implication to outright insinuations, trying to paint my every misstep as evidence of danger rather than humanity. But the judge saw through their facade and asked pointed questions about Lucas's relationship with them, about their absence during his early years, and about their motives now. One particularly tense day, the Parker family matriarch was called to the stand. I watched her fumble through carefully wrote statements, her rehearsed composure giving way to small tells. A shaking hand, a glazed look, when the judge questioned why she had rarely visited Lucas when he was younger. It was clear, even to the most impartial eye, that this was a battle less about love for Lucas and more about control and reputation. During closing arguments, my lawyer asked the judge to look at the whole of our lives, the patterns of comfort, the gentle routines, the outpouring of support from a town that had grown to love both me and Lucas. A safe, nurturing home, she said, is not built on appearances, but on patient, consistent devotion. We ask the court to honor the reality of this child's happiness, not the myth of a family's image. After so many days of vulnerability, I felt oddly calm. The outcome was no longer just about my fears. It was about insisting on the truth, regardless of what the Parkers or anyone else wanted the world to believe. I sat in the hushed courtroom, holding my breath, praying, replaying every word and moment, as if willing the scales to tip toward justice. We waited several agonizing days for the judge's decision. I filled that time with long walks, copious lists of anxieties, and mindless chores around the house. Lucas could sense the heaviness. Though I tried to shield him, he was quieter, drawing more superheroes, his way of envisioning saviors. Neighbors checked in. Maggie all but moved into my kitchen with casseroles and stories of her own tough times. A subtle reminder that seasons do change, and hardship is never truly permanent. When the day finally came, It was bright and clear, the kind of morning that tricks you into forgetting there's anything wrong in the world. I dressed Lucas in his favorite shirt and my best attempt at professional armor, and we made our way, together, once more to the courthouse. Inside, every second felt stretched to infinity as the judge read through her ruling. She outlined the facts, acknowledged the fierce advocacy on both sides, and described her process as balancing the interests, safety, and happiness of a child at the heart of so much noise. When the judge finally declared that my custody of Lucas would be upheld, I nearly collapsed with relief. Tears burned my eyes, and I let out a noise that was part whisper, part cry. Maggie squeezed my shoulders, and Lucas ran into my arms. In that embrace, it didn't matter what I'd lost along the way, only what I'd regained: the right to love, protect, and nurture my son without interference. The Parkers left the courtroom, their defeat as quiet as their power had once seemed invincible. They avoided my eyes, not acknowledging the outcome. It felt surreal at first, after so much fear and anticipation, to realize that justice, real justice, had found a way to rise above status, rumor, and intimidation. Afterwards, the judge spoke to me with a rare directness. She said, "Your vulnerability did not weaken your case. It's what made it real. Lucas is lucky to have you." I tucked those words away in my heart, to replay whenever doubt tried to settle in again. We walked out of the courthouse that day into a brilliant Nevada sun. Lucas held my hand so tightly, I thought he'd never let go. Willow Creek felt warmer, brighter, a place of second chances. The battle had dragged away so much, but it never managed to steal my hope or the community I'd built around us. That night, after the flurry of phone calls and hugs and casseroles, I sat in silence, gazing at Lucas as he slept, feeling an ache of gratitude so deep it hurt. I realized the fight, for all its ugliness and exhaustion, had also expanded my heart and my little world. It redefined not only what home meant for Lucas, but also for me. I was no longer just surviving. I was finally living, and I knew deep in my bones that whatever storms might come, we would weather them together. I documented the whole journey, uncertain whether I would ever share the folder marked Court Days on my laptop. Inside were scanned documents, journal entries, supportive letters, and Lucas's scribbled notes. I kept it not as a monument to hardship, but as a reminder, even when the odds are long and the enemy is well armed, love and truth have a fighting chance. In the weeks and months that followed, things slowly returned to a new normal. I still received the occasional cold glance in the grocery store, or a neighbor's awkward silence. Yet more people, many more, offered support, smiles, sometimes their own stories. Willow Creek embraced Lucas and me, scars and all. We didn't win by being perfect. We won by refusing to give up. If another storm ever comes, I now know exactly what I'm capable of. I've walked through fear and found the other side. As I tuck Lucas into bed each night, I whisper the truth I once barely dared to believe. Home is wherever there's love, willing to fight for it. A new beginning for our small family. When the dust finally settled after the court's ruling, I found myself looking at the world and at Lucas with fresh eyes. There hadn't been a parade, no dramatic soundtrack playing as we stepped out of the courthouse. In fact, all I felt in that first moment was exhaustion, a deep, bone-heavy fatigue that settled in after months of being wound too tight. But under that exhaustion, something different shimmered, what I can only describe as hope, quiet but persistent, like the slow melting of winter ice under spring sunlight. A new beginning sounds so simple in storybooks, but in real life, it's a tangled, delicate process, especially for a family that has been to war. For weeks after our victory, Lucas and I lived in cautious mode, as if the rug could still be yanked from under us. Each morning, I'd wake up before sunrise, stare at the ceiling, and ask myself if it was all real. Could I finally relax? Were we truly safe? These questions clung to me, and I could see the echoes of worry in Lucas too, when a strange number called, or when footsteps sounded outside our little house at night. But as the days passed, those anxieties began to fade, bit by bit. I saw it in Lucas first. He stopped flinching whenever the phone rang. He started inviting friends over for after-school snacks again, their laughter filling the living room with a joy I'd forgotten we could have. We went back to our tradition of Friday night movie marathons, where somehow popcorn still ended up in the strangest places, and Lucas would always fall asleep before the movie's end. There was healing in the return of these routines. The world expanded beyond the courthouse walls. I, too, began to breathe easier. Gone were the days of legal pads and evidence folders cluttering every surface, of late-night strategy calls and frantic note-taking. I put away the court documents first, then gradually threw away the stack of manila envelopes that had become symbols of the darkest chapter in our lives. In their place, I let Lucas's drawings take over the fridge. I bought new bookshelves and filled them with the stories we'd neglected. Stories of adventure, not survival. We celebrated our victory quietly. Some nights, when Lucas would fall asleep in my arms, I'd allow myself tears of relief and pride. I had never wanted to be a fighter. I still flinched at conflict, still wished for an easier road. But I was grateful for what the battle had taught me about endurance and about softness. There is a special tenacity in people who love anyway, who keep showing up, even when the world tries to knock them flat. I learned that every sunrise after a storm is proof that healing is less about forgetting pain and more about growing new things anyway, right through the cracks. Of course, things were not magically perfect. Some of the Parkers' friends continued to keep their distance, offering polite smiles, but little else. Gossip had a half-life in Willow Creek. Stories lingered, and not all wounds healed at the same pace. But where once I would have shrunk under the weight of sideways glances or whispered speculation, now I found myself standing taller. If someone wanted to judge our family based on rumors, it no longer felt like my business to change their mind. I had fought for my truth, and that would have to be enough. Lucas struggled too. There were nights he'd wake up from a bad dream and come crawling into my bed. There were questions he asked that I didn't always have answers for. Why did Grandpa want me to live with him instead of you? Did I do something wrong? The first time he whispered these words, my heart cracked all over again. I pulled him close and told him the only thing I knew for certain. None of this was your fault, sweetheart. Grown-ups sometimes make selfish choices, but you are always, always loved. It became our mantra, and with time, Lucas seemed to accept it. Enough, anyway, to return to building blanket forts and racing to beat me at bike rides down Main Street. As spring unfurled in Willow Creek, so did our lives. I started volunteering at Lucas's school, first in tiny tentative doses, then with growing confidence. To my surprise, I enjoyed it. Helping with reading groups and math games gave me a sense of belonging I'd missed for years. Other parents, some who had sat in the courtroom, some who only knew our story in broad strokes, began to reach out with small kindnesses. I accepted every gesture, no matter how awkward or unexpected. Community, I learned, was less about belonging to the majority and more about stitching together enough little threads of connection so you never fall through completely. Lucas thrived at school too. He made friends who cared more about superhero cards and muddy sneakers than family scandals. His grades improved, teachers commented on his gentle determination, and I watched him grow braver, less afraid to ask questions or share his opinion, even if it meant standing out. Willow Creek became his home, not by default, but by choice, a place where he was safe and seen, where he got to be a kid again instead of a pawn. For me, the real new beginning came the day I realized I had stopped waiting for the next blow. I found myself enjoying moments without calculating their cost. Things like laughter over spilled pancake batter, fresh flowers on the sill, the pleasure in planning a day with zero agenda except sunshine. I allowed myself to hope out loud around Lucas, to make plans for the summer, for birthdays, for someday maybes. With time, opportunity surprised me. The blog I'd started during the custody battle gained a following. Other single parents, neighbors, even people from out of state wrote messages of solidarity and thanks. I considered writing a book, but settled for now on sharing cocktails of wisdom, recipes, and encouragement online. In doing so, I discovered that my story, our messy, imperfect, beautiful story, could be the rope for someone else climbing out of their own darkness. I kept up therapy for both of us. Healing, I learned, is a continual process. Sometimes triggers appeared out of nowhere. A slammed door, a certain song on the radio, the arrival of autumn with its sharp, lonely winds. But rather than pushing those feelings deep down, I learned to sit with them. Some days, that meant letting myself cry in the car before walking into work. Some days, it meant letting Lucas eat ice cream for dinner after a hard day. Shame no longer lived in our house. In its place, there was room for all our feelings: fear, joy, pain, relief, in whatever wild order they chose to arrive. The biggest lesson I carry from our ordeal is this: family is not defined by blood or the approval of people with the loudest voices. Family is the quiet assurance, built moment by moment, that you are safe to be fully yourself. It's in the way Lucas yells, "I love you," across a playground, in the comfort of bedtime rituals, in the bravery of pursuing kindness over retribution. It's in showing up for each other, even when we're scared. Friendships, too, blossomed in unexpected places. Maggie, who had stood by our side since day one, became as close as a sister. We hosted dinners at our little house for other parents and their kids, trading stories and laughter over mismatched plates and pots of spaghetti. My world expanded, not just because the Parkers' shadow receded, but because I allowed the light of others to shine in. Lucas and I made a promise to always talk openly, to never let secrecy have a home in our hearts again. We also made a new list of goals, just for fun. Some were small: build a better treehouse. Some were big: take a road trip to the mountains next summer. Each time we crossed one off, we celebrated, not because our lives had become perfect, but because we knew the power of persistence. Looking back now, I barely recognize the woman who once felt she had nowhere left to turn, the one who built a new life, one breath, one small act of hope at a time, is someone I'm proud of. The court case didn't make me whole, but it showed me that broken things can be made beautiful as they heal. My strength didn't come from never feeling afraid, but from loving Lucas and myself enough not to give up. So the new beginning, as it turns out, is less an event and more a practice. It's in all the ordinary, extraordinary days that make up a life after the storm. In quiet breakfasts together, new friendships, honest conversations, and dreams that finally feel possible again. If I have one wish now, it's that Lucas always remembers the home we fought for. Not just the battles, but the love that built it. And as for me, each morning I find more gratitude than regret. The story isn't over. In fact, it feels like we're just getting started. And with every sunrise breaking over Willow Creek, 3 people, Lucas, me, and our now much braver hearts, step a little more boldly into the new chapter we so fiercely earned.